2012 was not a kind year to me. I lost my grandfather on March 16th, and then my boyfriend of 3 years decided to break up with me 10 days later, in my grandparents' house. Late April, I decided to do what most 20-somethings do. I set up a dating profile. I talked to a few people. One of them was the creepy EMT, who, for the rest of this story, I will refer to as Noah, not his real name. Noah was, if you haven't figured it out, an EMT. He lived about 15 to 20 minutes away from me. Initially, things were great. We had great conversations and a lot in common. We texted all the time. He seemed like a genuinely kind, caring, wonderful person. So after about 2 or 3 weeks of calling and texting, we decided to meet. The actual date itself wasn't bad. We went to the movies and then we went out for coffee. It was after the date that things started spiraling. Suddenly, Noah is in love with me. And suddenly, he wants to marry me. Suddenly, he can't wait to tell our kids our love story, like on How I Met Your Mother. I was using How I Met Your Mother as a crutch to get through my breakup. He told me that we were like Romeo and Juliet and that we were destined to be together. Every conversation we had for 7 days after that one date was just like that. It creeped me out. He went from this sweet guy to this overbearing, forcing marriage and kids down my throat. We barely knew each other, but it gets worse. So I decided that I'm not going to let him down easy. I try to treat people the way I like to be treated, but in hindsight, I realized this was not the best way to do it. I invited him out to the subway. Oh yeah, I know, by my apartment. I was trying to tell him how I wasn't over my breakup, how I wasn't ready to move on to a serious relationship, and definitely wasn't ready for marriage. He took this as I just wanted to casually date him, and he took the position of that he'll wait for me. It still gets worse. Somehow we wound up at my apartment. It was so awkward and uncomfortable. He kept trying to make out with me despite me telling him no. So he would stop and mess with one of my cats, and then try again. At one point, I moved to my recliner thinking that would stop him. Noah took that as an invitation to sit on my lap and try to kiss me. Thankfully, my sister, who was also my roommate, called, needing to be picked up from work. That night, or maybe the next night, I decided to send him a message on Facebook. I tell him what a wonderful guy he is and how any woman would be lucky to have him, but I wasn't ready to be in a relationship, and I wasn't going to be seeing him anymore. This led to a barrage of messages from him about how he loved me. How could I do this to him? We have something special. Then when he realized that I wasn't budging, it turned to how he knew I was just like all the other women. I'm a bitch and a whore. Noah started saying very concerning things, so me not knowing whether it was legit or not, I called for a welfare check on him. You might be thinking that this is the end, but it's not. About a month later, he saw me at the local community college. He followed me all over campus. A mutual friend sent me screenshots from his Facebook, where he talked about how he should have assaulted me when he had the chance. His friends were agreeing with him. It was chilling. In the fall of 2012, I took a job with a local outpatient mental health clinic as a receptionist. A few months later, a girl named Rose started at a different office. Next thing I know, there are these rumors about me, how I broke Noah's heart, how I cheated on him, and how I can't be trusted. People I never met were talking about me in my dating life. Eventually, Rose came to work in our office, and Noah was there all the time. He was always staring, always following. It was creepy. I dealt with him until December 2014 when I left the clinic. Thankfully, I haven't seen him since, and Rose, if you're still with him, I hope you are safe. So I'm a paramedic in the southern United States. I have been involved in emergency medical services and the volunteer fire service since I was a senior in high school. So at the point this story was told, 7 years of it. In that time, I had seen some really strange and frightening events, some of which I couldn't explain. I was also aware that I had a lot of exposure to violence, both towards my parents and towards myself. I've been punched, kicked, bitten, plowed through by mental patients trying to get out of an involuntary hold, cut and even stabbed with a used needle by a jerk who didn't like that I took his blood for the police officer after a DUI accident. But this incident was by far the most disturbing. Not only for what happened to me and could have happened to my partner, but for the events that preceded it and the fact that seemingly nothing was done after. In November 2011, I was working for a very large nationally renowned ambulance company for which I no longer work for. While I won't name the company, I will say that they will cease to exist in 30 days because of a merger with another very large nationally renowned ambulance company. We had the contract to provide 911 service for a predominantly rural county in western Tennessee, and it was a fun gig. One call a day usually, and usually really sick or injured patients. The kind of stuff you love being a paramedic for. Lots of drug and domestic violence related calls as well. That night it was particularly miserable, rainy and just dark. 911 had received a call about an assault, and now the deputies were calling for us to come assist them. The call came out as a woman down unresponsive, and we flipped on our lights and sirens and headed that way. Paramedics generally work with an EMT, and mine that night was a woman about my age, and 6 months, obviously pregnant. Alex, as we'll call her, was about 5'2", incredibly non-threatening, and not a very pushy person. I'm 5'7", at that time maybe 180. And I'm not a type A personality at all. Introverted and kind of a goofball. Not overtly a take-charge, authoritarian guy. I often joke that if I'm serious about something, something has gone terribly wrong. As we arrived there, I immediately knew something was off. This was an older neighborhood, dating back before World War II. The house was an old shotgun-style house, where the rooms are directly behind one another. So the living room would empty into a kitchen, which would empty into a bedroom. The lights were off, other than the light from the blue shrubs of the cop cars. There was a deputy at the door, who said she was in the living room. But the deputies were all at their cars about 50 yards away on the main road. No one was doing first aid. The deputy said that the husband had said he had came home and found his wife laying face down on the floor and called the police. He said he knew his brother did it. The deputy warned me the husband seemed drunk, and then vanished, back to his car. As we walked in, we see no one around. No husband, which should have immediately raised a red flag. We found the woman laying between a couch and a living room table and a recliner in the corner. The door to wherever was closed. But we went to work on the woman. She was beaten to a pulp, her nose deformed, her scalp was split open, and she was unconscious. She had areas of bruising all over her, some in various stages. Another red flag. But there was work to do. We set out about stabilizing the woman and beginning the process of starting an IV and placing a neck collar to immobilize her. In our distracted state, we hadn't noticed the man step out of the bathroom. I had just placed a collar and oxygen mask and was listening to her breathing sounds. When I heard the distinct click of a breakdown shotgun and footsteps, my partner was at the door with her back turned to get the stretcher off the porch. And I stood up straight to come face to chest with a nearly 6'2" man standing there, putting a pair of 12-gauge shells into the shotgun. He was massively built and drunk, with an angry scowl on his face. "I'm going to get them," he would repeat, looking at me with this gaze that, if it could have killed, would have cut me in half. No emotion other than anger at all. You could smell the alcohol, and he was sweaty and jittery. It felt like a movie playing that I was watching. All that training of, if the scene is safe, get out, was rushing through my head. But at this point, I realized he would probably shoot me if I tried to run. As I stood up from his wife and kept my eyes locked on his, I said, "Alex, get out, now," and heard her scream as she must have turned around and saw him. "Alex, get out now. I'll be fine," I repeated slowly. As I placed myself over his unconscious wife, between him and my pregnant partner, he stopped, stared me down, and pointed the barrel of the shotgun straight at my face as he did so. Again, no emotion, no concern, just anger, pure rage. Alex took off down the driveway, screaming for deputies. "I'm going to kill who did this. Get out of my way or I'll kill you too." Cold as ice and with a growing and incredibly creepy smile. I thought this was a joke at first. Someone's sick idea of a prank. "Well, please don't miss," was my response with a laugh. He wasn't laughing. He just stared ahead at me, gun at his hip pointed at my face. I replied, "If you shoot me, she's gonna die. I'm the only one who can take care of her," was my response. At this point, I was trying hard not to break down. "She dies, you die," was his response, and he sat down on the recliner across from us. He still had that smile, that creepy toothy smile, and those white eyes bearing down on me. This was going to be how I died. All I could think about, as I worked to tokily bandage these cuts on this woman's head, was how I was going to look up and suddenly feel and see nothing. My head would be hamburger meat. But then he lowered the gun and looked at his wife. "My brother makes me do this. He made me do all that, you see. She was cheating on me, I had to. I didn't want to hurt her. She made me." That same creepy grin. That same wide-eyed look. The same sweaty, trembling behavior. I was running out of things to do to keep this guy convinced I was busy saving her life. All of a sudden, I finally heard screaming and was blinded by flashlights. The deputies had been called back to scene, after they had left by my partner. When she realized they had gone looking for their brother, she called over the radio and had them come back. They stood there, guns drawn, yelling at the man to drop the shotgun. He did, and they threw him onto the ground and cuffed him. He started crying, screaming how she was dead, How it was his brother's fault, not his, and to leave him alone. Standing there shaking, no, trembling, and wondering just what the fuck had happened, we regained our composure, got our injured patient in the ambulance, and took her to the local trauma center. When we got back, a deputy took a report from us, and we had to file an incident report with our employer. We never heard anything after that. Fast forward to 2013, I'm not working in the county anymore. While I occasionally see Alex and treat the whole incident as a joke, I don't really talk much about it. I never saw anything on the news about us, and honestly never pushed the issue. I'm working for another service at this time, and picking up a kid from that county's hospital when I see Alex and mention the event, and ask whatever happened. She pulls me aside and tells me the rest of the story, and at the time, I realized more just how close I came to dying that night. The woman had regained consciousness a day after the attack, and told the hospital staff that her husband had been drinking heavily that day, and not taking his medicine. He had begun accusing her of sleeping with his brother that night, and had started hitting her until she had gotten knocked against the living room table and blacked out. He had eventually pled to the domestic violence charge and was placed in an inpatient psychiatric facility, and he's still there. The creepy thing, his brother had died in 2002 in a car accident in another state. According to the wife, he took medication because he had lucid and intense hallucinations of his brother doing things to people and telling them what to do. The deputies knew the house had a history of mental illness calls and never warned us or flagged the address in our dispatch system. It raised more questions than answers. Why wasn't he charged with the attack on us? Why did the deputies leave us there? And why wasn't anything done on the follow-up to help us? In 2006-2008, I was a student at a university in England, studying paramedic science. This course was a 2-year fast track to become a qualified paramedic, EMT. The course involved placements at various points throughout both years. First, we spent an evening and night with the dispatchers. I'll never forget some of those calls. Example, a man waking up in bed next to his wife who had died during the night. Next, we were stationed with the patient transport service, taking patients to their hospital appointments when they couldn't get there alone. Finally, after waiting a good 6 months for the opportunity, it was time to spend a prolonged placement with the 999 crews. You could choose a couple of preferred locations, and I was fortunate enough to be given the ambulance station close to my home. So I moved back to my parents' home that winter for a full term, leaving my university buddies behind. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't, because it turned out to give me far less interesting experience. The station was in Buxton, Derbyshire. Google map it if you will. It's a middle of nowhere territory. It's also 45 minutes from the nearest hospital, so you better not get badly hurt up there. But people did. One evening, we respond to a call where a guy has come off his bike on the Cat and Fiddle Run. It's named after a pub by the same name on that road, which passes over the Pennines Mountains. Bikers love to bomb it up and down. It's notorious. The guy broke a brick wall with his body, and legs were over his shoulders. We took him with blue lights to the aforementioned hospital. I don't think he survived. This is where things got messed up. We turn out of our hospital, travel maybe a half mile, and get flagged down by a pedestrian. She shouts through the window that somebody has been beaten badly. We later found out that this was the case of somebody bumping into somebody else in a bar, nothing more. At that exact moment, a guy in a red t-shirt stumbles out from a side street and collapses into the road. I had been in the rear passenger seat of the patient compartment, my mentor and her technician riding up front. They get out before me to help him, while I open up the side bay. Stupidly, I climb out as my mentor helps him in. That's the point at which I notice two things. He isn't wearing a red t-shirt. He's topless and saturated head to waist in his own blood. And there's a mob of people heading straight at us. Maybe 10, maybe 15, I forget. I'm still outside the ambulance and pretty much frozen in terror. I'm only 19 at this point and kind of a pussy. This was 2007. Thankfully, my mentor hauls me inside and locks the door instantly. She then turns to me, asks if the rear door is locked. It is not. They open it from the outside. My mentor pushes them back and, I couldn't believe it, heckles them, telling them to pick on a group of people, not just one man. She then manages to lock the door. What happens next will stick with me forever, and clearly has as I'm telling this story nearly 10 years on. They begin to try and flip the ambulance. Meanwhile, another guy starts hammering the side window, shatters it, cuts himself wide open with blood everywhere, but keeps going. They were animals. There is a window between the rear and the front cabin. We see a police car approaching. He doesn't stop and continues straight past. Please give UK cops guns. Only later did I find out that the keys were still in the ignition, but nobody had attempted to enter the cabin through sheer luck. preface this story, I'm a paramedic and I have been for about 10 years. Working in emergency medicine, you get to see the weirdest and the worst of people, so it's not too uncommon for these types of stories to exist. However, in my 10 years, I have never experienced pure terror incarnate, like I had about 6 years ago. I will not be revealing specific or identifying details as it pertains to privacy and HIPAA. This may be a bit long, but I hope it's worth to listen. About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city, as well as the county, which had a few other small towns. The city itself was not a large city, sub 100k people. Working for that service required working 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy, maybe you'd get 5 to 10 calls within 24 hours, and generally get some decent sleep at night. This city was a pretty rough place, as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folk from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information we had was that a person in an apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbors screaming for help. We responded urgently as the details were very limited. When we arrived on scene, police and the fire department were already there. We were getting ready to make entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment she heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us keys to get into the unit. As we opened the door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. Police entered first, and with our flashlights we followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating when I say there were literally 5-foot-tall mountains of garbage and food and dishes in the kitchen, and the same in the living room, but with magazines, clothes, and garbage. This meant there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate the apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead where the bedroom and bathroom was. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door as there was light shining from underneath. The officer opened the door and just stood in the hallway with a flat tone. He said, "She's in here." I walk in first into the bathroom. The first thing I notice is the peculiarity of the light in the bathroom. It is a very pale yellow light coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off an odd vibe as it was just such an unnatural light. The next thing I noticed is the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks, just nothing, empty, except the vanity which contained the sink. On top, in the bowl of the sink, were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were opened and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed was the body of an elderly woman lying naked in the tub. As I walk closer, I can see her lying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin is pale and there is about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes are closed and her head is against the bottom of the tub, with her mouth and nose completely submerged under the water. My partner steps in behind me. He suggests that we call the coroner and inform them of the body. 2 officers pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so that there is 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. With me being who I am, I decide to do my due diligence and at least make sure the lady is dead. I kneel down next to the tub and reach my arm in and put my fingers on her neck, attempting to check for her pulse. In an instant, without warning, the slightest hint of movement, the woman springs up out of the tub with the agility and speed of a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was to stand up as quick as possible, and I just stood there staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes wide as can be, before she started screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best as she could, while sitting in the water still. I quickly look around and notice everyone else who was in the bathroom with me bolted out of there, not a single soul in sight. I tried to steel myself and tried calming the lady down, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied, screaming, and told me she does this every morning as she has some kind of joint condition, and soaking in warm water helps her ease her joint pain. Now at this point, I have my doubts and I have to question this woman's sanity. The next step is to determine her mental capacity to ensure she is in the right frame of mind to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per law, she is able to refuse any and all care as she is mentally sound. I ask her if she will at least allow me to check her vitals so that I can be sure she is healthy and I can add it to my report. She vehemently refuses and tells me to get out of her house, which she has the right to. I acknowledge and have her sign a refusal of service form. As I leave the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with the 2 officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, are just staring at me with eyes wide and gaping mouths, speechless. I don't say a word, and we all leave the apartment. Once we all got outside, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the officer started laughing too. I thought I might have shit myself. My partner told me later that all he remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh fuck," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. I wish I could say I never saw this lady again, but that would be untrue. If you all enjoyed this and want to hear part 2, let me know.